In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a universal truth that even the mightiest empires refuse to acknowledge. Never underestimate the species that crawled out of gravity wells on burning chemical rockets and called it progress. The NIGMA Empire had ruled for 12,000 years, their crystalline cities spanning 1,000 worlds, their technology so advanced that they could reshape matter with thought alone. They had witnessed the birth and death of countless species, cataloged the rise and fall of civilizations, and considered themselves the eternal guardians of galactic order. When humanity first stumbled into their territory with their crude fusion drives and primitive computers, the NIGMA barely noticed. These bipedal creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star seemed no different from the hundreds of other species they had encountered, conquered, or absorbed into their empire. But humanity was different in ways the NIGMA could never comprehend. They were the species that had survived ice ages by making fire from sticks. They had crossed oceans in wooden boats held together with tar and prayers. They had split the atom not because they understood it completely, but because they were curious enough to try. They were the species that had looked up at the stars and decided that the impossible distance between worlds was merely an engineering problem waiting to be solved. And when the NIGMA Empire threatened everything humanity held dear, these descendants of persistence hunters and toolmakers did what they had always done when faced with extinction. They adapted, they innovated, and they refused to give up. The NIGMA Empire had been warned. They had been given every opportunity to reconsider their path. But arrogance is a fatal flaw, even for gods among the stars. This is the story of how an empire that had ruled the galaxy for millennia learned too late that some species don't know when they're supposed to lose. This is the story of humanity's final warning, and what happened when it was ignored. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the Earth ship Prometheus, watching as the NIGMA capital world of Zinthkar grew larger in the viewport. The planet was a masterpiece of engineering, its surface covered in crystalline spires that reached into the upper atmosphere, connected by streams of pure energy that pulsed like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien in its perfection. "Ma'am, we're receiving docking instructions," reported communications officer Chun from behind her. His voice carried the tension that had infected the entire crew since they'd entered NIGMA space 3 days ago. Every human ship that had encountered the Empire before had either been destroyed or simply disappeared, leaving behind only scattered debris and unanswered questions. Elena adjusted her diplomatic uniform, the weight of her mission settling on her shoulders like lead. She was humanity's first official ambassador to the NIGMA Empire, tasked with delivering a message that could determine the fate of her entire species. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might also be the last. "Tell them we're grateful for their courtesy," she replied, though courtesy seemed an inadequate word for what amounted to a divine audience. The NIGMA had responded to humanity's request for diplomatic contact with what their translators had interpreted as mild curiosity, the way a scholar might examine an interesting but ultimately insignificant insect. The Prometheus was humanity's finest achievement in starship design, a fusion-powered vessel that represented 3 centuries of human engineering and scientific progress. Compared to the NIGMA ships they had encountered, it was little more than a sophisticated raft floating in an ocean of technological superiority. The NIGMA vessels seemed to bend reality around them, moving through space without visible propulsion and ignoring physical laws that human scientists still struggled to understand. As their ship was guided into a docking bay the size of Manhattan, Elena couldn't help but feel like a Stone Age hunter being invited into a cathedral. The scale of everything was overwhelming, designed to humble visitors and remind them of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. The docking bay's walls were smooth as glass and seemed to emit their own light, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like living things. Captain Morrison joined her at the viewport, his weathered face grim. "You sure about this, Ambassador? We got maybe 30 seconds before we can't run if this goes bad. Elena smiled despite the situation. Tom, if this goes bad, running won't help us. The NIGMA could probably turn our ship into its component atoms from here if they wanted to. We're committed now. The captain nodded reluctantly. He had been Elena's friend since their academy days, and she could see the concern in his eyes. They both knew that the mission was essentially a suicide run disguised as diplomacy, but it was humanity's only chance to avoid complete annihilation. The docking process completed with an elegant precision that made human technology seem crude by comparison. There were no jolting impacts or mechanical grinding, just a subtle shift in the ship's artificial gravity that indicated they were now part of the station's massive structure. Elena gathered her diplomatic pouch, containing the formal documents that represented humanity's final attempt at peaceful coexistence, and headed for the airlock. The NIGMA delegation that met them was both magnificent and terrifying. They stood 3 meters tall, their bodies composed of what appeared to be living crystal that shifted color in response to their thoughts. Their faces, if they could be called faces, were geometric arrangements of light and shadow that somehow conveyed intelligence and vast age. When they spoke, their words bypassed the humans' ears entirely, appearing directly in their minds with perfect clarity. Welcome, representatives of the species designated as human. The lead figure communicated, its crystalline form pulsing with soft blue light. I am Nexarch Zilmoth, voice of the Third Circle, speaker for the Eternal Assembly. We have agreed to this meeting as a matter of academic interest. Elena stepped forward, feeling like an ant addressing mountains. Thank you for receiving us, Nexarch. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing the United Earth Alliance and the human colonies. I come bearing an important message for my people. The Nexarch's form shifted, colors flowing through its crystalline structure in patterns that Elena's briefings had told her indicated polite attention. Speak your message, small one. We are curious about the words you believe carry such importance. Taking a deep breath, Elena began the speech she had rehearsed 1,000 times during the journey. Honored Nexarch, humanity comes before the NIGMA Empire not as conquerors or supplicants, but as fellow sentients seeking to coexist peacefully in this galaxy. We understand that our expansion into space has brought us into contact with worlds you consider your domain, and we apologize for any unintended transgression. The Nexarch's colors shifted to what her briefings indicated was mild amusement. Around the vast chamber, other NIGMA figures materialized from the walls themselves, their attention focused on this curiosity from the outer rim. However, Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. I must inform you that humanity will not submit to subjugation or extinction. We have studied your empire's history, and we know your pattern of expansion. Species that resist are eliminated. Those that submit become components in your vast machine of conquest. We offer a third option. The chamber fell silent, the gentle harmonics that had filled the air ceasing completely. Elena felt the weight of countless ancient minds focusing on her with sudden intensity. You offer terms to the NIGMA Empire? Nexarch Zilmoth's communication carried overtones of disbelief. You, whose species has barely learned to leave its birth world, presume to negotiate with beings who have shaped the galaxy for 12 millennia? Elena held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to prostrate herself before these cosmic powers. I offer a warning, Nexarch. Humanity has survived and thrived on a world that has tried to kill us for millions of years. We have endured ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and our own worst impulses. We have fought wars that should have destroyed us and emerged stronger. We do not surrender, and we do not die easily. The Nexarch's form began to glow more intensely, its crystalline structure shifting through the spectrum. Are you threatening the NIGMA Empire, little creature? I am explaining humanity, Elena replied calmly. We have analyzed your military capabilities, your technology, your expansion patterns. By every logical measure, You should be able to sweep us aside like dust. But logic isn't everything, Nexarch. Sometimes the impossible happens. Sometimes the underdog wins not because they're stronger, but because they're willing to pay prices their opponents can't imagine. Elena reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small device, causing the NIGMA guards to tense visibly. This contains a complete record of human military history, from the first tribal conflicts to our recent colonial wars. Study it. Learn what happens when you corner a species that believes death before dishonor isn't just a motto, but a way of life. She placed the device on the crystalline floor between them. We're offering you peaceful coexistence. We'll restrict our expansion to systems you don't claim. We'll trade beneficial technologies. And we'll even serve as a buffer against threats from the galactic rim. All we ask is that you leave our existing colonies alone and recognize our right to exist as an independent species. Nexarch Zilmoth gestured, and the device rose from the floor, suspended in a field of blue energy. And if we refuse your generous offer? Elena met the alien's impossible gaze without flinching. Then, you'll learn firsthand why Earth's apex predator isn't humanity, Nexarch. It's human ingenuity armed with human desperation. We've had 300 years to prepare for this moment, and we've spent every day of those 3 centuries assuming we would eventually face a threat that outclassed us completely. The Nexarch's colors shifted to patterns Elena didn't recognize from her briefings. Around the chamber, other NIGMA beings were communicating among themselves in rapid bursts of light that were too fast for the human translation systems to follow. You fascinate us, Elena Vasquez of humanity. The Nexarch finally communicated. In 12,000 years, only 3 species have stood before the NIGMA Empire and offered terms rather than begging for mercy. 2 of those species learned the cost of their arrogance. The third became the foundation upon which our current expansion was built. Elena felt a chill run down her spine, but she maintained her composure. And what was the fate of those species, Nexarch? The first was the Kethmoran Collective, masters of biological manipulation. They believed their ability to adapt their forms would make them unconquerable. We preserved their most useful genetic templates and integrated them into our servitor castes. The second was the Vorthak hegemony, who thought their quantum manipulation technology made them gods. Their consciousness patterns now serve as computational matrices in our greatest ships. The Nexarch's form pulsed with what Elena was beginning to recognize as predatory satisfaction. The third were the essence weavers, beings of pure thought who believed matter was beneath them. They were correct, in a sense. We elevated them beyond matter entirely, binding their consciousness to serve as the core intelligence of our empire. They dream our dreams and think our thoughts forever. Elena felt her heart hammering in her chest, but she forced herself to smile. Fascinating. 3 species that thought they had advantages that would save them. Tell me, Nexarch, what did they all have in common? They were powerful beyond your comprehension, little creature. No, Elena said softly. They were specialists. Each one had developed incredible abilities in a single area, then assumed that specialization would be enough. But you know what humanity's specialization is, Nexarch. The crystalline being's attention focused entirely on her. We don't specialize, Elena said. We adapt. We take the best ideas from everyone we encounter and make them work for us. We turn disadvantages into advantages and find solutions that shouldn't exist. And most importantly, we never, ever assume that our current capabilities are our limits. She gestured to the device floating between them. That contains more than just our military history, Nexarch. It contains records of every innovation born from desperation, every victory snatched from the jaws of defeat, every time humanity looked at an impossible problem and solved it anyway. We've been preparing for you not by building better weapons, though we've done that too. We've been preparing by becoming the kind of species that can't be conquered, even by gods. Nexarch Zilmoth's form shifted through colors Elena had never seen before. Bold words from a creature whose species could be eliminated with a single thought. Could you? Elena asked. Right now, in this moment, could you destroy humanity with a thought? Because if you could, next arc, you would have already done it. The fact that we're standing here having this conversation tells me that you've studied us more carefully than you're admitting. You know something about us has you concerned, or we never would have made it this far. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could feel the weight of cosmic intelligences considering her words, analyzing every possible implication. Finally, the Nexarch spoke again. The NIGMA Empire will consider your proposal, Elena Vasquez of humanity. You will remain as our guest while the Eternal Assembly deliberates. Be aware that this deliberation may take some time by your species standards. Elena Boyd Formali. We're honored by your consideration, Nexarch. However, I should mention that we have a deadline. A deadline? The Nexarch's colors shifted to what Elena hoped was curiosity rather than anger. If our ship doesn't return to human space within one standard month, our military commanders will assume the worst and implement what we call the Samson Protocol. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending you can't overcome our defenses, but I will tell you that the cost will be higher than you expect. Much higher. Elena met the alien's gaze steadily. Choose wisely, Nexarch, because once that protocol activates, there won't be any choice left for either of our species. 3 weeks had passed since Elena's audience with Nexarch Zilmoth, and the crystalline halls of the NIGMA capital station had become both a palace and a prison. The human delegation was treated with what their hosts considered generosity, provided with quarters that had been specially modified to accommodate their primitive biological needs. Food was synthesized according to human nutritional requirements. The atmosphere was adjusted to Earth normal composition, and their movements within a designated section of the station were unrestricted. But Elena knew a cage when she saw one, no matter how gilded. During their captivity, she had not been idle. The NIGMA, in their supreme confidence, had allowed her access to their historical archives, apparently amused by the idea of a primitive species trying to understand their vast civilization. What Elena discovered in those archives both terrified and encouraged her. The NIGMA Empire was older than they claimed, and far more ruthless. The 12,000 years they spoke of was merely their current expansion phase. Before that, they had existed for over 50 millennia as a confederation of species on their home cluster of worlds. The transition to empire had come when they developed what they called the Transcendence Protocol, a technology that allowed them to absorb the consciousness and capabilities of other species into their collective structure. Every species they had encountered since then had been given the same choice that humanity faced now: submit to absorption into the empire or face extinction. Those who submitted became part of the NIGMA collective, their individual consciousness preserved but subordinated to the greater will of the empire. Those who resisted were systematically eliminated, their worlds stripped of resources and left as monuments to the futility of defying cosmic order. But Elena had also discovered something the NIGMA themselves seemed to have forgotten. In their vast archives, buried among millions of absorption records, were files on 17 species that had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not absorbed, but vanished without explanation. The NIGMA records listed them as statistical anomalies, minor mysteries not worth investigating further. Elena suspected they represented something else entirely, species that had found a third option. Captain Morrison found her in their makeshift quarters, studying the translated archives on her portable tablet. His expression was grim, carrying news she already expected. "We've got 6 days left before the deadline," he reported quietly, aware that their conversations were certainly being monitored. No word from command, but the quantum beacon confirms the fleet is in position. Elena nodded without looking up from her reading. The Samson Protocol wasn't just a bluff, though she hoped the NIGMA would never learn its true nature. Humanity had indeed spent 3 centuries preparing for this moment, but not in the way their enemies might expect. Any word from our hosts about their decision? Nothing official, but the crew's been noticing increased activity in the station's deeper levels. Lots of NIGMA figures moving around in patterns that suggest major decision-making processes. Commander Singh thinks they're bringing in additional experts to study the data you gave them. Elena finally looked up, setting the tablet aside. Tom, I need to tell you something about that data package. There were things in it that even I wasn't fully briefed on before we left. Morrison settled into the chair across from her, his weathered face serious. I figure as much. Command doesn't send their best diplomat on a suicide mission without some hidden cards to play. The military history files were real, but they were just the surface layer. Embedded in the data structure were records of everything humanity has learned about NIGMA technology from our previous encounters. Our scientists have been reverse engineering their systems for decades, Tom. We've cracked their communication protocols, mapped their quantum manipulation techniques, and identified critical vulnerabilities in their energy distribution networks. Morrison's eyes widened slightly. You're telling me we've been spying on them? We've been learning from them, Elena corrected. Every time one of our ships was destroyed by NIGMA forces, the wreckage wasn't just debris. It was a data collection platform. Every encounter was a learning experience. The NIGMA have been so confident in their superiority that they never considered the possibility that a primitive species might be capable of analyzing their technology. Before Morrison could respond, the walls of their quarters began to glow with soft blue light. A familiar crystalline figure materialized in the center of the room, its form more solid and imposing than Elena had seen before. Ambassador Elena Vasquez, Nexarch Zilmoth communicated, the Eternal Assembly has reached a decision regarding your proposal. Elena rose from her chair, straightening her uniform with practiced calm. I'm honored to hear the Assembly's wisdom, Nexarch. The alien's form pulsed with colors that Elena's cultural briefings had taught her to interpret as satisfaction mixed with condescension. The NIGMA Empire has indeed studied your species extensively, as you suspected. Your historical records are fascinating, if primitive by our standards. We have observed your tendency toward innovation under pressure, your remarkable adaptability, and your species' unique approach to problem-solving. The Nexarch moved closer, its crystalline form casting prismatic reflections across the room's walls. We have also analyzed the technological data embedded within your historical files. Quite clever, little creature. Your scientists have indeed managed to decode some of our simpler communication protocols and energy signatures. For a species that has barely achieved interstellar travel, this represents remarkable progress. Elena felt her heart sink, but maintained her diplomatic composure. I'm pleased that the Assembly found our capabilities worthy of notice. Oh, we found them worthy of much more than notice, the Nexarch replied, its colors shifting to what Elena was learning to recognize as predatory amusement. They have convinced the Assembly that humanity would make an excellent addition to our collective consciousness. Your adaptability, your innovative thinking, your remarkable resilience in the face of overwhelming odds, these qualities would serve the Empire well. Morrison stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm before catching himself. And if we refuse, then you will serve as an object lesson to the next species that attempts to negotiate from a position of weakness, Zilmoth communicated with casual certainty. Your colonies will be reduced to their component atoms, your homeworld will be rendered uninhabitable, and the concept of humanity will be erased from the galactic record. It will be as if you never existed. Elena felt the weight of her species' fate settling on her shoulders, but she had been preparing for this moment for months. I see. And how long do we have to consider this generous offer? The absorption process begins immediately, the Nexarch replied. Your ship will be modified to transport the integration matrices back to your homeworld. You will have the honor of personally overseeing your species' transcendence to a higher form of existence. The alien's form began to shift, becoming more complex and geometric, patterns of light flowing through its structure in hypnotic spirals. Elena felt a strange pressure in her mind, as if something vast and alien was attempting to establish contact with her consciousness. The process is painless, Zilmoth assured her as the mental pressure increased. Your individual awareness will be preserved and enhanced, integrated into the greater tapestry of NIGMA consciousness. You will experience existence as we do, freed from the limitations of biological form and the narrow perspective of a single species. Elena closed her eyes and focused on a specific thought pattern she had been taught during her final briefing on Earth. The mental pressure suddenly lessened, and when she opened her eyes, the Nexarch's form had shifted to colors she didn't recognize. Fascinating, the alien communicated. You resist the initial integration probe. This suggests a higher level of neural sophistication than our scans indicated. I resist because I choose to resist, Elena replied calmly. That's what you've never understood about humanity, Nexarch. We don't submit to inevitability. We change it. Morrison was looking at her with confusion and growing alarm. The mental pressure Elena had felt hadn't touched him, which confirmed what she had suspected about the Nexarch's capabilities. The NIGMA could selectively target individual minds for integration, beginning the absorption process even before their victims realized what was happening. Your resistance is admirable, but ultimately futile, Zilmoth replied. The integration process has already begun in your crew members. Within hours, they will be eager volunteers in their own transcendence. Elena smiled, an expression that seemed to puzzle the Nexarch. You've made two critical errors in your analysis of humanity, Nexarch. The first is assuming that our ship represents the full extent of our capabilities. She tapped a specific sequence on her tablet, sending a coded signal that will be meaningless to NIGMA technology, but perfectly clear to human systems. The second is assuming that we came here to negotiate in good faith. The station around them suddenly shuddered, a vibration that seemed to pass through the crystalline structure like a discordant note in a perfect symphony. Alarm signals began flashing in the walls, and Elena could hear the harmonics of NIGMA communication systems switching to emergency frequencies. What have you done? The Nexarch demanded, its form flashing through angry reds and defensive whites. I've activated a quantum beacon that's been transmitting our exact location and status back to human space since we arrived, Elena explained as the station continued to vibrate around them. Right about now, the first wave of our response is arriving. Not here, of course. We're not stupid enough to attack your capital directly. Morrison's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The outer colonies. You're hitting their expansion fleets. Elena nodded. 17 simultaneous strikes against NIGMA expansion operations, each one time to activate the moment our beacon confirmed that negotiations had failed. Your people are about to learn what happens when you threaten a species that's been planning for this war since the moment we detected your first scouts 3 centuries ago. The Nexarch's form had become a chaotic swirl of colors, its usual composure shattered by what Elena suspected was the first genuine surprise it had experienced in millennia. Impossible. Our perimeter defenses would have detected any human fleet movements. Your primitive vessels cannot approach our territories undetected. You're absolutely right, Elena agreed cheerfully. Our ships can approach your territories undetected. But you've been so focused on watching for ships that you miss the other things we've been sending into your space. The station's emergency harmonics were reaching a crescendo now, and Elena could see NIGMA figures materializing throughout the corridors beyond their quarters, their forms flickering with the rapid communication patterns of a species in crisis. For the past 50 years, we've been seeding your expansion routes with what we call breadcrumb probes. Tiny, self-replicating devices that attach themselves to passing ships and space debris. They're made from materials so primitive that your sensors dismiss them as natural phenomena. Each one carries a small quantum communicator and a very specific payload. Elena's smile widened as the full scope of humanity's preparation became clear. Every major NIGMA facility, every expansion fleet, every strategic resource depot you've established in the past 5 decades has been mapped, cataloged, and marked for destruction. The breadcrumb network has been waiting for one signal to coordinate a galaxy-wide strike against every significant NIGMA asset outside your core territories. The next arc is formed solidified into a configuration Elena had never seen before, its crystalline structure taking on sharp, weapon-like configurations. You dare threaten the NIGMA Empire with your primitive technology? I dare to threaten you with human ingenuity, Elena corrected. Each breadcrumb probe carries a payload specifically designed to exploit the vulnerabilities in your energy distribution systems. Remember those simple communication protocols your scientists dismissed? They were also the access keys to your power networks. The station shuddered again, more violently this time, and Elena could see cracks beginning to form in the perfect crystalline walls around them. This station isn't just the capital of your empire, Nexarch. It's also the primary command node for your entire expansion network. And right now, every breadcrumb probe in the galaxy is simultaneously overloading your power grids with feedback cascades designed to turn your own technology against you. Elena stood up, facing the increasingly agitated NIGMA leader with calm determination. You have a choice now, Nexarch. You can continue trying to absorb humanity and watch your empire tear itself apart from within, or you can agree to our original proposal and call off the attacks before they reach your core worlds. The Nexarch's form flashed through rapid sequences of color, its communication systems clearly overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis unfolding throughout the empire. Finally, it managed a coherent response. You would destroy the galaxy's greatest civilization to preserve your insignificant species. Elena met the alien's impossible gaze without flinching. We would do whatever it takes to remain free. That's what you never understood about humanity, Nexarch. We're not afraid of mutual destruction. We're afraid of slavery disguised as transcendence. The station's power systems chose that moment to fluctuate wildly, plunging their quarters into darkness before emergency lighting kicked in. In the distance, Elena could hear the sounds of massive structural failures echoing through the crystalline corridors. Your move, Nexarch. But I decide quickly if I were you. The breadcrumb network is just getting started. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching through the view screen as the NIGMA expansion fleet died in brilliant cascades of light. The alien ships, each one the size of a small moon and crackling with energies that could reshape matter at the subatomic level, were tearing themselves apart as their own power systems turned against them. Breadcrumb activation successful across all 17 target zones, reported Commander Torres from the tactical station. Enemy fleet formations are breaking apart. I'm reading massive power surges and system failures throughout their command structure. Chen nodded grimly, feeling no satisfaction in the destruction unfolding before them. The NIGMA ships were beautiful in their alien way, living works of art that represented thousands of years of technological advancement. Watching them die was like watching the burning of libraries, each loss representing knowledge that could never be recovered. But humanity had learned long ago that survival sometimes required terrible choices. "Any word from the Prometheus?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Ambassador Vasquez had gone into the heart of enemy territory, knowing it was likely a one-way trip. The quantum beacon confirming the failure of negotiations had been their signal to begin the war, but it told them nothing about the fate of the diplomatic mission. Still transmitting on schedule, Admiral, Communications Officer Park replied. Last burst contained confirmation that the primary NIGMA command node has been compromised. Breadcrumb activation was successful at the target coordinates. Chen allowed herself a moment of hope. Elena Vasquez was one of the finest minds humanity had produced, a diplomat who understood that sometimes the greatest act of negotiation was demonstrating the cost of refusing to negotiate. If anyone could survive the opening moments of a war against cosmic gods, it was her. The tactical display updated, showing the expanding wave of destruction as breadcrumb probes throughout NIGMA space activated simultaneously. Each probe was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed to appear as insignificant space debris while carrying enough quantum-engineered payload to cripple the most advanced alien technology. Admiral, we're receiving priority communications from the Outer Colony's defense grid, Torres reported. Multiple NIGMA response fleets are mobilizing from their core territories. Estimated time to engagement with our forward positions, 14 hours. Chen had expected this. The breadcrumb network would cause massive damage to NIGMA expansion operations, but their core worlds and primary fleets would be heavily shielded. The aliens would respond with overwhelming force, seeking to crush humanity before they could consolidate their advantages. Signal all task forces to implement Protocol 7, she ordered. It's time to show our guests what humans do when we're properly motivated. Throughout human space, the greatest military mobilization in the species' history was already underway. Every shipyard was operating at maximum capacity, turning out vessels designed specifically for this conflict. Every military academy had graduated its classes early, sending young officers to command ships that existed only in theoretical designs weeks earlier. Every civilian transport had been retrofitted for combat or logistical support. But the real strength of humanity's response wasn't in their ships or weapons. It was in the 3 centuries of preparation that had gone into understanding their enemy. Admiral, we're getting reports from the deep space monitoring stations, Park announced. The NIGMA core fleets are moving faster than our projections indicated. They're using some kind of spatial folding technology to accelerate their response time. Chen studied the incoming data with growing concern. The NIGMA were adapting to humanity's tactics faster than expected, bringing their most advanced capabilities to bear in ways their intelligence hadn't predicted. This was the moment she had been dreading, when the war would shift from carefully planned strikes to desperate improvisation. Compile everything we're seeing and transmit it to Dr. Okafor's research team, she ordered. If the enemy is using new technology, we need to understand it quickly. Dr. Kenji Okafor received the transmission in his underground laboratory beneath the ruins of Tokyo, where humanity's most advanced research into exotic physics was being conducted. The laboratory had been built into the bedrock itself, surrounded by quantum isolation fields designed to hide its activities from even the most sophisticated surveillance systems. Spatial folding capabilities beyond our models, he muttered, reviewing the data streams from the fleet engagements. Around him, the most brilliant minds of human science worked frantically to analyze every scrap of information about NIGMA technology that the war was revealing. Doctor, we're seeing consistent patterns in their power signatures, reported Dr. Sarah Kim, one of his lead researchers. Their ships are drawing energy from what appears to be an extra-dimensional source, but the connection points are vulnerable to quantum interference. Okafor nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. Show me the interference patterns from the breadcrumb activations. If their power systems are extra-dimensional, there should be resonance effects. The data painted a picture that was both encouraging and terrifying. The NIGMA had indeed evolved beyond the limitations of conventional energy generation, tapping into sources that existed outside normal space-time. But that same advancement had created dependencies that human quantum physics could exploit. Send this to Admiral Chun immediately, Okafor ordered, and prepare the Erebus protocol for immediate implementation. Back on the Defiance, Chun received the research data just as the first NIGMA response fleet emerged from folded space at the edge of the Sol system. The alien ships were unlike anything in their previous intelligence files, sleek predators that seemed to bend light around their hulls and move through space as if physics were merely a suggestion. Fleet composition analysis complete, Torres reported. 12 primary warships, each one approximately 8,000 meters in length. Energy signatures are off our measurement scales, Admiral. These aren't expansion fleet vessels. These are dedicated warships from the NIGMA core territories. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. The enemy had escalated beyond anything humanity had planned for, bringing their true military might to bear from the beginning. This wasn't going to be a war of attrition against expansion fleets. This was going to be a direct confrontation with an empire that had conquered galaxies. Signal all human fleets to implement Erebus Protocol immediately, she ordered, and send a message to the colonial governments. Execute the diaspora contingency. The diaspora contingency was humanity's final insurance policy, a plan developed in the darkest moments of their strategic planning. If the war went badly, if Earth and the primary colonies fell to NIGMA forces, the surviving human populations would scatter across the galaxy in ships designed for decades-long autonomous operation. They would become a nomadic species, carrying human civilization in their holds and ensuring that no single defeat could eliminate their entire people. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the lead NIGMA vessel, Park announced. They're requesting direct communication. Chun straightened her uniform, knowing that this moment would likely determine the course of the war. Put them through. The main view screen shimmered and resolved into an image that made Chin's breath catch in her throat. The being that appeared was clearly NIGMA, but unlike any they had encountered before. Its crystalline form was darker, more complex, with structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. When it spoke, its words carried overtones of power that made the ship's hull vibrate. I am Warneck Sark Kethmoran, voice of the final circle, bringer of absolute resolution. The being communicated. I come to deliver the NIGMA Empire's response to your species' act of unprovoked aggression. Chun managed to keep her voice steady despite the pressure she felt pressing against her mind. I am Admiral Sarah Chun, representing the United Earth Alliance. Our actions were a response to your Empire's ultimatum demanding our submission or extinction. Your species was offered transcendence. The Warneck Sark replied, its form pulsing with patterns that hurt to look at directly. Your ambassador rejected this gift and chose instead to wound the empire that sought to elevate you. The consequences of this choice will be absolute. The alien warship began to glow with energies that the Defiance's sensors couldn't properly measure. Around it, the other NIGMA vessels were arranging themselves into a formation that created visible distortions in space-time. You have demonstrated that humanity possesses a certain crude cunning, Keth Moran continued. This will make your absorption into the Empire more valuable. Your consciousness patterns will serve as templates for strategic analysis, preserved forever in the service of superior beings. Chun smiled grimly, remembering Elena's words about human stubbornness in the face of impossible odds. Warneck Sark, you're about to learn why that crude cunning has kept humanity alive for millions of years. She gestured to Torres, who activated the Erebus Protocol with obvious reluctance. Throughout the Sol system, hidden installations that had been built into asteroids, moons, and seemingly empty space began to power up. The quantum isolation fields that had concealed them for decades fell away, revealing the true extent of humanity's preparation for this war. What you see is crude cunning we call innovation, Chen explained as the NIGMA fleet found itself surrounded by weapons platforms that hadn't existed moments before. Every encounter we've had with your scouts, every piece of technology we've observed, every tactical pattern you've displayed has been studied and countered. The hidden weapons platforms were opening fire now, not with conventional energy weapons, but with quantum disruptors specifically tuned to interfere with extra-dimensional power sources. The effect on the NIGMA ships was immediate and devastating, their perfect hulls flickering as their power systems began to destabilize. Impossible, Keth Moran communicated, its form shifting to configurations that radiated shock and growing rage. Your primitive technology cannot affect NIGMA battle cruisers. Our primitive technology can't, Chen agreed. But our not-so-primitive technology can. Did you really think we spent 3 centuries preparing for this war without learning everything we could about your capabilities? The Warneck Sarkis ship attempted to fold space and retreat, but found itself held in place by gravitational anchors that operated on principles human scientists had stolen from NIGMA technology itself. Around it, The other warships were experiencing cascade failures as their exotic power systems turned against them. "This is impossible," Keth Moran repeated, its mental communication becoming increasingly erratic. "The NIGMA Empire has ruled the galaxy for 12 millennia. We have absorbed thousands of species, conquered millions of worlds, and transcended the limitations of physical existence. You cannot defeat us with techniques you learned from observing our expansion fleets." Chen's smile widened as she watched the mighty alien warships struggling against weapons they didn't understand. "Warn Exarch, you just made the same mistake your empire always makes. You assumed that because we learned from watching you, we were limited to copying what we observed." The lead NIGMA vessel was beginning to show structural damage now, its crystalline hull developing fractures as the quantum disruptors interfered with the exotic matter that formed its structure. "What you're experiencing isn't just your own technology turned against you," Chen explained. "It's your technology improved by human innovation, refined by human engineering, and deployed by a species that's been planning this engagement since before your scouts first entered our territory." She leaned forward in her command chair, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher delivering a particularly important lesson. "Every species you've ever absorbed added their knowledge to your collective consciousness. But you never had to fight a species that had been studying you for 3 centuries, learning not just your capabilities, but your limitations." The war in Exarch's form was beginning to destabilize now, its complex crystalline structure losing coherence as the ship's power systems failed. This is not possible. The NIGMA Empire is eternal. We have conquered galaxies." "Past tense, warn Exarch," Chen replied calmly. "Because humanity just changed the rules of the game." The alien warship's final transmission was a burst of incoherent rage and disbelief before its power systems failed completely, leaving it drifting dead in space. Around it, the other vessels of the mighty NIGMA response fleet were suffering similar fates, their technological superiority turned into a critical vulnerability by human ingenuity and 3 centuries of careful preparation. Chun watched the alien ships die with grim satisfaction, knowing that this victory was just the beginning. The NIGMA Empire still controlled thousands of worlds and commanded technologies that humanity barely understood. But for the first time in 12 millennia, they had been forced to retreat from a battle, and their aura of invincibility had been shattered. "Signal all human forces," she ordered. "Phase 1 complete. Beginning Phase 2 operations immediately." Throughout human space, the greatest war in galactic history was just beginning. And for the first time since the conflict started, humanity had reason to hope they might actually survive it. The NIGMA capital station Zenthkar was dying, and Nexarch Zilmoth could feel each system failure as if it were a wound in its own crystalline body. The perfect harmony that had defined NIGMA's civilization for 12 millennia was dissolving into chaos as the quantum feedback cascade spread through their infrastructure like a plague designed specifically to kill gods. Elena Vasquez stood in the observation chamber where she had first delivered humanity's warning, watching through the transparent crystalline walls as the greatest civilization in galactic history tore itself apart. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was witnessing the fall of the NIGMA Empire from the very heart of their power, a guest in the palace as it crumbled around them. "Your species has doomed the galaxy," Zilmoth communicated, its form flickering between configurations as the station's power systems struggled to maintain cohesion. "Without the NIGMA Empire to maintain order, the galaxy will fall into chaos. Billions of worlds will descend into barbarism." Elena turned from the viewport to face the alien leader, her expression calm despite the apocalyptic destruction surrounding them. "The galaxy will adapt, Nexarch. It always has. The only thing ending here is your empire's assumption that it was indispensable." Around them, the crystalline walls were beginning to show stress fractures as the feedback cascades reached critical levels. In the distance, Elena could see entire sections of the massive station breaking away, their perfect geometric forms dissolving into component atoms as their binding energies failed. Captain Morrison appeared beside her, his uniform torn and his face bearing the marks of their harrowing escape from the guest quarters. The past 6 hours have been a nightmare of collapsing corridors and failing life support systems as they fought their way through the disintegrating station. Ambassador, our ship is prepped for departure, he reported. Dr. Okafor's modifications to our quantum drive should get us out of the system before the final cascade reaches the station's core. Elena nodded, but didn't move toward the exit. She was watching Zilmoth's form as it continued to destabilize, the ancient being's consciousness struggling to maintain coherence as the technological infrastructure that supported its existence failed around it. Next, Sark, I want you to understand something before we leave, she said. This wasn't vengeance. This wasn't even really about stopping your empire's expansion. This was about proving a point. The NIGMA leader's attention focused on her with difficulty, its communication systems disrupted by the cascading failures throughout the station. What point could possibly justify the destruction of galactic civilization? That no species, no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, has the right to decide the fate of others without their consent, Elena replied. Your empire was built on the assumption that might makes right, that technological superiority grants moral authority. We've just demonstrated that both assumptions are false. She gestured toward the viewport, where the destruction of the NIGMA fleet could be seen as distant flashes of light against the star field. Every species you absorbed was given the same choice: submit or die. You never offered a third option because you couldn't conceive of one existing. But humans are very good at creating options that shouldn't exist. Zilmoth's form pulsed with what Elena had learned to recognize as desperate confusion. Your third option is mutual destruction. How is that preferable to transcendence? Because it's our choice, Elena said simply. Freedom to choose your own path, even if it leads to extinction, is more valuable than any form of imposed perfection. That's what you never understood about us, Nexarch. We'd rather die free than live as slaves, even slaves to benevolent masters. The station shuddered violently around them, and Elena could hear the deep harmonic resonances that indicated core structural failure. It was time to leave. Goodbye, Nexarch Zilmoth, she said formally. I hope your people find wisdom in their defeat. The NIGMA leader's response was lost in a burst of interference as they ran for their ship, but Elena caught enough of it to understand the alien's final message, a grudging acknowledgement that humanity had earned the right to exist on their own terms. 3 months later, Elena stood in the council chambers of New Geneva, delivering her final report to the assembled leaders of humanity. The war against the NIGMA Empire was over, not because one side had defeated the other, but because there was no longer a NIGMA Empire to fight. The cascade failures spread through their entire infrastructure network within 72 hours, she reported to the packed chamber. Every NIGMA facility built using their quantum manipulation technology experienced total system failure. Their ships, their stations, their planetary installations, even the technological matrices that supported their consciousness patterns, all of it simply stopped working. General Harrison, the supreme commander of Earth's military forces, leaned forward in his seat. What about survivors, Ambassador? Are we dealing with refugees, resistant cells, or scattered fleets? Elena considered the question carefully. The NIGMA, as we knew them, no longer exist, General. Their consciousness patterns were too dependent on their technological infrastructure to survive its failure. However, the species they had absorbed over the millennia are beginning to reassert their individual identities. She activated a holographic display showing the former NIGMA territories. We're seeing the emergence of hundreds of previously unknown civilizations as the Empire's collective consciousness fragments. Some are trying to rebuild NIGMA technology, others are rejecting it entirely and developing along different paths. A few have requested contact with humanity, hoping to learn from the species that brought down their former masters. President Martinez, elected specifically to handle the aftermath of humanity's first galactic war, studied the display with obvious concern. What's our policy toward these emerging civilizations, Ambassador? Some of them must hold us responsible for the destruction of their empire. Elena smiled, remembering her conversations with various liberated species over the past months. Actually, Mr. President, most of them are grateful. The NIGMA Empire maintained order, but it was the order of absolute conformity. These species are experiencing freedom for the first time in thousands of years, and many of them see humanity as liberators rather than destroyers. The holographic display updated to show the current political situation across the former empire. We're seeing the formation of loose confederations, mutual defense pacts, and trade agreements between species that were forced to suppress their individual cultures under NIGMA rule. The galaxy isn't descending into chaos, as Nexarch Zilmoth predicted. It's evolving into something more diverse, more dynamic, and potentially more stable than the Empire ever was. Dr. Okafor, now serving as humanity's chief scientific advisor, raised his hand. What about the technological legacy of the NIGMA? Are we going to see other species developing similar capabilities? That's the fascinating part, Elena replied. The quantum manipulation technology that formed the basis of NIGMA power appears to require a specific type of collective consciousness to operate effectively. Most of the liberated species are either unable or unwilling to recreate those conditions. Instead, they're developing technologies that complement their individual cultural approaches to problem solving. She paused to let the implications sink in. What we're seeing is the emergence of genuine galactic diversity for the first time in 12,000 years. Instead of one dominant technological paradigm, we have dozens of different approaches to advanced science, each one suited to the species that developed it. Senator Wong, representing the outer colonies, stood to address the chamber. Ambassador, what does this mean for humanity's role in the galaxy? Are we going to become the next dominant empire? Elena shook her head firmly. No, Senator. That's exactly what we fought to prevent. Humanity's role in the galaxy should be that of a catalyst, not a ruler. We've demonstrated that even the most powerful empire can be challenged and defeated. Now we need to ensure that no species, including our own, ever again assumes the right to impose its will on others. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed trade routes and communication networks spreading throughout the former NIGMA territories. We're already seeing the benefits of true galactic cooperation. Species that were forced to contribute their knowledge to a collective consciousness are now freely sharing innovations and discoveries. Scientific progress in the past 3 months has exceeded anything achieved during the final centuries of NIGMA rule. General Harrison leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. So we won the war by making sure no one could win it again. That's either brilliant or insane. It's human, Elena replied with a smile. We've always been good at finding solutions that shouldn't work, but somehow do. President Martinez stood to address the chamber. Ambassador Vasquez, on behalf of the United Earth Alliance and all of humanity, I want to thank you for your service. Your mission to the NIGMA Empire required incredible courage and sacrifice, and your success has secured humanity's freedom for generations to come. The chamber erupted in applause, but Elena raised her hand for silence. Mr. President, members of the Council, I need to make one thing clear. The war against the NIGMA Empire wasn't won by courage or superior technology or tactical brilliance. It was won by a simple principle that has guided humanity throughout its history: the belief that freedom is worth any price, and that no one has the right to choose your path for you. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of the leaders who would guide humanity into its new role in galactic civilization. The NIGMA Empire fell because they forgot that principle. They became so focused on order and efficiency and technological perfection that they lost sight of what makes consciousness valuable in the first place: the freedom to choose, to grow, to make mistakes, and to find your own way among the stars. Elena walked to the center of the chamber, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. The galaxy is free now free to develop along paths that the NIGMA Empire never could have imagined. Our responsibility is to ensure it stays that way, to be guardians of diversity rather than imposers of conformity. She paused, thinking of Nexarch Zilmoth and the countless beings who had lived and died under the Empire's rule. The NIGMA weren't evil, they were simply wrong. They believed that consciousness was a problem to be solved rather than a gift to be celebrated. They tried to create perfection by eliminating choice, and in doing so, they destroyed everything that made their subjects worth preserving. The chamber fell silent as Elena delivered her final words to the assembled leaders of humanity. We have a chance now to build something better than an empire, something that has never existed in galactic history. A true confederation of free species, each one developing according to its own nature while contributing to the greater tapestry of galactic civilization. But this will only work if we remember the lesson we taught the NIGMA Empire. That consciousness without choice is not consciousness at all, and that true strength comes not from imposing your will on others, but from inspiring them to choose cooperation freely. Elena looked out at the leaders who would guide humanity into its uncertain future among the stars. The galaxy is watching us now, waiting to see what we do with the freedom we've won. Let's make sure we prove worthy of the price that was paid for it. As the chamber erupted in sustained applause, Elena allowed herself a moment to remember all those who had sacrificed so that this moment could exist. The crews of the ships that had carried breadcrumb probes into enemy territory, knowing they might never return. The scientists who had spent their lives learning to counter technologies beyond their comprehension. The diplomats and negotiators who had bought precious time with their words while humanity prepared for the inevitable war. The NIGMA Empire was gone, its 12,000-year reign ended by a species that refused to accept the limits others tried to impose on them. But Elena knew that the hardest work was just beginning. Building a free galaxy would be far more difficult than destroying the empire that had enslaved it. Looking out at the stars visible through the chamber's windows, Elena smiled. Humanity had always been good at impossible challenges. They had learned to fly by studying birds, reached the stars by burning chemicals, and defeated gods by refusing to bow to them. Now they would learn to build a civilization worthy of the freedom they had won, one choice at a time, one species at a time, one star at a time. The galaxy was free, and for the first time in 12 millennia, anything was possible.